This episode is sponsored by Law Tiger San Diego. If you or a loved one is injured in a motorcycle accident, call 1-800-LAW-TIGERS for a free case evaluation.
Welcome to the Scenic Ride, a motorcycle podcast where we explore the most epic roads in North America and beyond. I'm Staci.
I'm Sanna.
And I'm Davin.
And today we're exploring the Natchez Trace Parkway. Natchez, I might say it a couple different ways in this podcast. Depending on who you talk to, you can say it multiple ways. But this road is very historic and it's just a fun all-American road to cruise down. So if you've been thinking about riding it, stay tuned because we're going to be talking about some of the best things to stop and see along the way. Before we get into it, if you haven't done so already, we would love it if you followed at The Scenic Ride on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And we post a lot of video clips from the episodes there. So if you want to see some footage from the places we talk about or just see our beautiful faces, that is a good place to go for that. And if you're enjoying this podcast, we'd also love it if you could rate and review us on your favorite streaming service. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile, we also have merchandise available over on thescenicride.com. So the Natchez Trace Parkway is a 444-mile scenic byway. It is actually an all-American road, and it basically traces a 10,000-year-old historic travel corridor that goes from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. So it goes all through Mississippi, Alabama, and then through a small portion of Tennessee as well. This dates back, like I said, 10,000 years. The old trace basically consisted of a bunch of trails that Native American tribes would use. And eventually this route started to be used by people called cane tucks, who would basically come down the Mississippi River and then sell their boats and then walk back up the trace and go back up towards Tennessee and Kentucky. There's also some Civil War history and some other things along this route. So if you are a history nerd, this is one of those roads that you will just absolutely love because it is just so slow going and it is just so engulfed in so much history. And that is me. I am a huge history nerd, so I had so much fun when I rode this a couple of years ago. Today, the parkway does link more than 350 archaeological sites and 22 burial and ceremonial mounds from different Native American tribes over time. And with that being said, that's just talking about the archaeological sites and Native American stuff. There is, like I just mentioned, there's recreational sites like good scenic overlooks. There is also stuff that has to do with different wars. There's all kinds of stuff on this route. So we will not be able to cover every single one of these stops in this podcast, but I will do my best to highlight a few of my favorite ones that I got to experience along the route and that I think are worth, stopping to see, especially stopping to see and getting off of your motorcycle. I will say that a lot of the stuff on this route is things that you can pull up, read the sign directly from your bike. Usually you can just pull up, keep your bike on, read for 30 seconds and keep moving on. And then there are some things that are worth, stopping to check out and to walk around and see. So Davin and Sanna, have you gotten to ride this at all?
I've ridden the very top. So the part from Nashville down through Columbia and that area. And then I've rode the very bottom, nothing in between.
I have not ridden it. But I had a trip planned there in November of last year. I was supposed to go to Arkansas and visit Hot Springs National Park as part of my quest to visit all 63 national parks. So my original plan was to fly into Nashville and rent a bike and then take that way, like basically go down the Natchez Trace Parkway?
Natchez Trace Parkway. You can call it the Trace as well. And if you say Natchez, whatever, it's all the same.
So my original plan, so I was supposed to go down the Natchez Trace Parkway from Nashville and then go into basically Mississippi and Louisiana and then do Arkansas. But The thing that got in my way was that there are no direct flights from San Diego to Nashville. And I did not want to have a layover. So I opted to fly into Dallas instead and rent a bike and go like a more Western route. So I missed out on this whole thing just because I didn't want to lay over. But one day I'll make it out there.
One day. I definitely think it's worth it. You know, it goes through a very interesting section of the country. Mississippi isn't exactly known to be scenic. It's very flat, lots of pine trees and whatnot. But I think the way that it is built is it's very similar to the Blue Ridge Parkway, where there's not a lot of entrances and exit points, and it is managed by the National Park Service, just like the Blue Ridge Parkway is. So you just kind of feel like you're off the beaten path. There are a couple areas where you go through some major towns like Jackson, Tupelo. It ends really close to Nashville. So there are some times where you can step back into civilization if you want, just like the Blue Ridge Parkway. But overall, I think in the South, I think it's so enjoyable. The only people that I ever hear say that they thought it was really boring and not worth it are the speed demons, which is ironic because I definitely am a speed demon. But I think this is just one of those roads that it's for the kind of person who just wants to cruise and just have like a fun day cruising and not be around a lot of traffic. So I definitely would recommend it.
You're a fart demon, as we call them in Sweden.
Yes. For those who don't know, fart means speed in Swedish. So I am now the fart demon. But when I did the Natchez Trace Parkway, I did it in technically 2.5 days. I had been doing some photography work in southern Louisiana and then decided to go from southern Louisiana up to Natchez, Mississippi, which is right on the Mississippi River. And it's where we're going to start this journey up the trace in this podcast. And I spent half a day there and then basically did Natchez to Tupelo, stayed the night in Tupelo. And then the following day, I rode up to Nashville. And then I crashed on a friend's couch in Nashville for the night before my journey continued elsewhere. But looking back, I would say two solid days on the trace is pretty good. It's a pretty good speed because since it is managed by the National Park Service, the speed limits are a lot lower than what you would find on other roads, just like the Parkway. So it's like 30 to 50 mile an hour, depending on where you're at. And I will say, depending on what part of the trace you're on, there are lots of like national park cops along the way, and they will pull you over if you're speeding and you don't want that speeding ticket. So mind the speed limits if you do see them. But because it is a slower going route, it's just, if you want to stop to see anything, it's really hard to do the 444 miles in a day. So just plan that one out. And I think that if you're someone who's seeking this road out, I think that you're probably into history more than likely. So of course you're going to stop and see stuff because there's just so much along this route that's worth stopping for. So I visited in mid-April, and that time of year in the South can be very hit or miss. It can be 100 degrees and really humid, or it can be, thunderstorms. I think like 2 days before I rode it, there was like tornado warnings and stuff in the area and some really crazy storms moved through. So the spring can be hit or miss, but I actually lucked out. I think the highest it got in temperature was like 80, and there was only a very small section on the route that got really humid. So I feel like if you want to do this trip, I would recommend doing it in the early spring, maybe March to April. And I will say, because you're going from basically this whole route goes like south to north. So all the trees could be blooming down at the southern end, but then as you get closer to Nashville, things might still be dead along the way. So that's also something to consider if foliage is something that you're interested in. If you go too early in the year, everything will still be dead and it'll look like winter depending on where you're at. But I would recommend going in the spring, just the weather might be a little all over the place. And then I would also recommend going in the fall. I've been told that fall on the Natchez Trace Parkway is insane. And especially as you get towards Alabama and Tennessee, it gets really pretty. So I would say probably for that, you're going to want late October to early November. But that can change every year.
I will say that the trip I went on in November of last year, I did go into Mississippi. I just didn't go as far east as what we're talking about here. I stuck to basically going up along the Mississippi River. And the week before I got out there, it was probably in the 70s and 80s. And the week after I was out there, it was in the 70s and 80s. But while I was in Mississippi, it was in the 30s. I was cold. Like, I was actually going to take more time in Mississippi. I was just so cold that I just left and went into Arkansas, where it was slightly warmer. But it was the first week of November. It was generally, I think, a good time to go to the south. I just happened to hit a cold front. But that time of year, I do think it's good for foliage in this area because it's so far south, the leaves change a little bit later than they do in some of the northern parts of the country.
Definitely. And I think, I grew up in Texas. So when I think of fall colors, I do not think of the South. I remember the first time I had visited Oklahoma and I was on the back of my boyfriend's motorcycle at the time. And we were just riding down this road and I saw like my first ever thing of trees where they were like yellow, orange, and red. And I actually made him turn around and go back so I could see them again because I had truly just never experienced fall colors because that wasn't a huge thing in the Houston area because we have tons of pine trees. And so that's what a lot of like the southern part of the Natchez Trace Parkway is like too. So for it to be considered a good fall destination, I think is very interesting. So yeah, I would say definitely check it out. If it's considered a good fall destination for the South, it's probably worth it.
Yes.
So another couple things to know before you go and do this route. Another similarity to the Blue Ridge Parkway is that there aren't any gas stops immediately along the route, and you're likely not going to see a gas station sign for any of the exit points off of the parkway. So depending on your gas tank, you might need more gas than others. Some people might be able to do like this whole thing, with one gas stop. I think I filled up in Natchez. I filled up near Jackson. And then there was one stretch closer to Alabama where I had to get off the parkway and kind of search for gas and just to make sure I wouldn't run out. But just something to keep in mind. You might want to check it before you get on the route. I did this in 2023, and I do remember a few sections not having cell signal, and I have Verizon, and Verizon pretty much has network coverage everywhere in the United States. So that was a very interesting thing to pull my phone out and it be on SOS mode. So
not sponsored.
Yeah, not sponsored. So I pay my phone bill every month with my own hard-earned monies. But yeah, so that might be something you just want to kind of plan ahead before you get onto the parkway itself.
Yeah. Staci, is it similar to the Blue Ridge in the fact where you can kind of just take one of the exits and go a few miles to the nearest town? Kind of the same deal?
Most of the time. There are some areas from my experience where it might be more than a few miles to the nearest town. But then there's others. So this, in Mississippi specifically, because a lot of the trace goes through Mississippi, the majority of the route is in that state. You go really close to Jackson. Like you can actually get off and go into Jackson and check it out, and as well as Tupelo. And near those, it's pretty easy to get off and go grab gas. Like the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's like that near Asheville. Like you get off and you go 2 miles and you're at a gas station. But then there's other parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway, right, where you might get off of it and it might take you 10, 15 miles down a twisty mountain road to find a gas station. So it's similar but different. You're not going to find twisty mountain roads as exits on the trace. But yeah, I just think a good rule of thumb is to look ahead and just say, okay, I'll get gas in Natchez. Like that would be my top tip. Get gas in Natchez. And if you can make it all the way to Jackson on a tank, awesome. If you can't, maybe just kind of check and see which one of those little towns out there might have something, because they can be few and far between. So
yeah. And it's probably similar in going back to like watching your speed where, there's sections of the parkway where I wouldn't see another car for 20, 30 minutes. So you're zipping a little faster through there. But then once you start seeing more action, more civilization, then slow down and respect those signs a little closer.
100%. And one thing that a lot of locals told me when I did this trip, because I talked about it on social media a tiny bit, and then after I published the YouTube video about it on my YouTube channel, a lot of people even left comments in the comment section talking about wildlife. So I did just want to touch on that. There are a ton of deer And because the parkway is, protected by the National Park Service and pretty much the whole way down the parkway, both sides are it engulfs you in trees. And depending on where you're at, it depends on the types of trees you're surrounded by, but there's tons of wildlife. So turkeys, tons of deer. You just don't want to be riding this near like nightfall or dawn because you will see tons of wildlife. I know on my second night when I went from Natchez to Natchez to Tupelo, the section from Jackson to Tupelo, I started to run out of daylight in there, and the deer definitely came out. So definitely something to keep in mind. You just don't want to be on that road too late at night.
Yeah. Good point on the turkeys too, because those things have seemingly popped up everywhere in the last decade. Like there's places where I'd never seen a turkey in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in my whole life. And now there's like dozens, like they're everywhere. I don't know where these turkeys came from, but they will pop up and get you.
I feel the same way. I feel like it's kind of like bald eagles, which is cool. I'm stoked to see more bald eagles all throughout the country. Like last summer I had like 4 or 5 of them fly over me in different states. And I'm like, I think this is like a good omen. So keep flying over me. But I've seen a lot more turkeys over the years too. And I
just coming out of nowhere.
I do remember seeing a ton of them on the trace. So especially towards Tennessee.
Yeah. Those, speaking of scary birds, those are the scariest.
Yeah. Those are the big scaries.
Oh, yeah, we talked about scary birds on the last episode, but as the certified bird hater, we have to talk shit about birds.
Those are like class B birds. B for big boy, just like a plane.
Well, and they're on the ground. That's the problem. Like if a big bald eagle comes swooping past you, you're probably not going to hit it with your bike because it's in the air. But the turkeys are on the ground, so like that's the problem.
Yeah,
and then they try to fly, and it makes it even worse.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get into the actual route here. So when I did this route, like I mentioned before, I did this route from south to north. So I started in Natchez. So throughout this podcast, we'll just go along that same route. And looking back, I'm really glad that I did this route from south to north because I do feel like the Tennessee portion of the route, as far as riding goes and as far as the scenery goes, I do feel like that is the best part for motorcycling. However, I will say that the southern part between Natchez and Jackson, Mississippi was also surprisingly really enjoyable. A little bit of a different kind of foliage along the route, but I actually really enjoyed it. So when I did this route, I started in Natchez and I stayed the night in Natchez, which I would highly recommend you do if you have the opportunity to do so. Natchez is the oldest continuous settlement on the Mississippi River. It was established in 1716, and it kind of sits up on this like rocky bluff right there on the Mississippi, which is super, super cool because if you've traveled through parts of Louisiana along the Mississippi River or even up towards like Memphis, there's no bluffs. It's just the Mississippi River and, some big bridges that go across it. But this area, it's just the geography is just so different, and it's really, really pretty. And that is one thing I would recommend doing if you do go to Natchez is to go walk around on the bluffs. You can basically pull up and there's lots of parallel parking up near that area and you can overlook the Mississippi River and the bridge. And I actually watched sunset from there, which was really cool. Another thing to do there that I did that I would recommend is go to the area just down the street called Under the Hill. And historically, this was apparently like a very rowdy district in Natchez. And you can read about this online. I definitely won't do it any justice trying to spark note it for y'all. But it wasn't necessarily a red light district, but it was just kind of like the Wild West portion of town where, anything went essentially. But nowadays, it's just a bunch of restaurants essentially. And I think there's like a biker bar down on that street as well. The name isn't clicking in my brain right now. I think it's literally called like Under the Hill Saloon or something. It's super simple. But I did not go to any biker bars. I went to a spot called the Magnolia Grill, and they're known for like Southern fare, like fried green tomatoes and shrimp and other stuff. And of course, when I'm traveling through an area, I always try to get stuff that's like local. So fried green tomatoes with every meal if I can in this region of the country, please. But that spot was great, and I would definitely recommend it. The Grand Village of the Natchez Indians is also in this town, and I did not go to this, but that was only because they were closed early in the morning, and I had tried to plan it out so that I could do it first thing when I left, and they just weren't open early enough. And this is one where you, I believe, have to pay a fee to get in. So unlike a lot of stuff along the parkway that's free to experience, there are some things that are closer to these towns where there are fees to experience them. So I did skip that, but I have heard that's a really good one to see. Another thing that I did in Natchez that I think is worth seeing, and it's one of those kind of unfortunate things that this area is known for being in the South. Natchez was a huge slave trade port. And there's a spot in Natchez called the Forks of the Road, and it is the site of the second largest domestic slave market in the United States, just behind New Orleans, if that says anything. And I think just from a historical standpoint, to be able to stand in a place like that and understand what went on there, I think it's great to, give yourself 5 minutes and just put yourself in that scenario and think about how different of a time that was. It's very interesting. They even have there's a cement block that's in the ground, and it has old chains and stuff cemented into the ground. I don't know if they're real or not, but it's there, and it just kind of puts things into perspective for you of how things were back then.
Those are crazy places to check out. The one that comes to mind for me that I've been to is Normandy in France, where you're there. I've seen several movies of D-Day, and now it's just this sleepy little French area. And it's just so hard to even imagine the travesties that went on in some of these areas with our tiny little human brains.
Absolutely. And I think with, slavery stuff, it's such a dark time in our country's history. And it's hard to think about, that kind of stuff that has happened. But I think it's important to remember that, our country isn't perfect and that we've had some dark times. So definitely one of those that I think is worth going to.
I think also when you're traveling in the South, there's so many well-preserved plantations that people visit, and those just tell a different story. They tell the story from a different perspective. Those are beautiful residences where a lot of absolutely horrible shit went down, but you can go there and just kind of almost ignore the history if you don't want to feel uncomfortable. But if you go to a place like Forks of the Road, you have to sit in your discomfort and really think about it. And I think that's important to do as well.
Definitely. That's a great way to put it. And I will say that, you do have to use your imagination a tiny bit, because this particular destination is not super exuberant. There's not a lot left there. But it existed, right? So if you can sit there and just use your imagination, you can think of how shitty it was back then. And we will talk about a plantation here in just a few that's in ruins now. So yeah, I think Natchez is really cool. And if I could go back, I would actually end up spending a whole day there. There's a lot of stuff I missed. If you're into historic buildings, they have lots of them. I personally am more into indigenous sites and, some of the other historical things than I am looking at certain, just old buildings or old churches. That's not really my thing necessarily, but they have a lot of them. The houses that are up right on the bluffs remind me a lot of French architecture that you would find in New Orleans. So that part is actually really cool. And I do remember some of the info boards being in French. So they must have a lot of French tourists that come to Natchez to experience it. So that was pretty cool. You don't see that a lot in the US either. You'll see stuff in Spanish and maybe other languages, but I don't feel like you see a lot of French translations.
Unless you're in Louisiana, I feel like has a lot of that. I mean, especially New Orleans has a lot of that.
Yeah, with the culture and history of Louisiana, especially New Orleans, it makes sense. But I wish I knew off the top of my head. I feel like Natchez is 2.5 hours from Lafayette, which is where I started my journey. It wasn't too far. It might be a little further than that, but So yeah, you're not too far from New Orleans, long story short. But as you begin leaving Natchez and you start going up the parkway, one of the first things that I think is worth going to check out, and I do think it's worth getting off your motorcycle and climbing to the top of, is the Emerald Mound. And this is the second largest mound, basically, behind the Monk's Mound at Cahokia, which is in Illinois. It's just east of St. Louis. And long story short, these mounds were from the Mississippian indigenous era. Sorry, I can't talk. But they were used for burials, temples, and ceremonies. And if you go there, you can read about all of this stuff. If you look at the mound itself, it doesn't look like much. It just looks like a giant pile of grass. But you have to remember that these structures are thousands of years old at this point. So these are like truly like early indigenous people that lived in these mounds. And there's all kinds of mounds down the Natchez Trace Parkway, but this one is just special because of how large it is. There is another one further up the parkway called the Pharr Mounds, and it starts with a P, I believe, Pharr. And they're a lot smaller, but you'll see a lot more little structures. And I think some of those were like used for burials as well. So I think this one's kind of cool to check out. And then again, you can just kind of sit there and immerse yourself and pretend like there was this whole civilization basically living at this mound. I probably spent 15 minutes there. It doesn't take too long. It's basically like the parking lot's right in front of the structure, which is another nice thing is you don't need, an hour at all of these stops. They're pretty quick. Another nice thing to see, speaking of plantations, I did not go do this, but I know it is a really iconic stop in Mississippi, which sounds so weird to say out loud, but is the Windsor Ruins. And this was a plantation that burned down in the late 1800s, and it kind of looks like an old Roman structure, essentially. It just has these big, giant concrete pillars that just look like it came from Rome. It isn't on the parkway, but a lot of people will exit the parkway to go to it. And if I had to guess, it's maybe 5 to 10 miles off the parkway, so it's not too far. But as you keep going up the trace, you're going to pass by, like I said, there's so many little things. So you'll see, like a little sign and you just pull off, you read it really quick and you keep going. And so if you guys are listening to this and, you're thinking, oh my gosh, she didn't mention, this stop or this stop. It's just because it's something that you don't have to get off your bike to go see. So the next stop that I think is worth hopping off your bike to check out, though, is the Sunken Trace. And this I thought was really, really cool because as you walk through this area, so again, the parkway itself it follows the original footsteps of the foot trail that people used 10,000 plus years ago. And then it eventually modernized. At one point, the United States even tried to use it as a postal route. So at one point, the original trail was even widened to be used by like horse and buggy, essentially. And in this particular spot, you can kind of get a glimpse of that. And just from people using it over time, the trail is literally sunken into the ground by like, we'll call it 20, 30 feet. I don't know right off the top of my head, but I do have a cool picture of me like standing in it and looking up. And it's just crazy to think of all the people that have gone through there before you, before there was a paved road going through and, they had to trudge through mud and mosquitoes and all this other stuff. I think there's even a sign at this particular spot that had a quote it was like a quote from someone's journal. And they talked about the skeeters, like the guy even spelled mosquitoes, skeeters in his journal note. But I just think about all that stuff and like the things people probably like endured back in the day as they like took that route.
I just Googled some photos of it and it looks really fascinating. It looks cool. I'm not a history buff by any means, but I like hearing you talk about history, Staci, because you're so interested in it. And I like the perspective of just putting yourself in the shoes of the people going through these trials and tribulations, because everything was so much harder back then, so much harder than it needed to be. And so it's interesting to look at it with those glasses on.
Yeah. And I think like we live in a really privileged time period in the world where everything is right at our fingertips, from AI, doing certain things for us that make it easier, sometimes more difficult, but that's another story. We have cars that, can go hundreds of miles and are pretty reliable. Same with motorcycles, right? Back in the day, this route covers 10,000 years of history, and our country, in 2026, the United States turns 250 years old. So just even the history that's in that 250 years, and you think about like all these people that came before us and like used this route, it's just so interesting to me. And one thing I just love about this route is just like all of the Native American stops along the way, because it goes through, I believe, like 3 main tribal areas. I think it's Choctaw, Chickasaw, and there's one other one. I can't remember off the top of my head, so apologies. But there's just so much of that stuff out there. And I know in a previous podcast that we recently recorded, we talked about in New Zealand how they're really good about, honoring like the Maori heritage. And I feel like in the US, a lot of times, like we aren't the best at doing that. And so it's nice to see, especially in an area like the South that has not always had the best history of, considering people equals. It's nice to see that this particular area, I think, tries to honor that and trace some of those steps, essentially. So
yes. I will also note that this is the second time we're referring to the New Zealand episode in this podcast, and we are actually publishing that after this one. So if you hear us talk about the New Zealand episode, we will publish that in 2 weeks. So stay tuned. It'll be great.
Spoilers. But after the Sunken Trace, pretty much, I think from there, you're about 30 or 45 minutes from Jackson, Mississippi. Don't quote me on that. I can't quite remember anymore. I will say that out of the whole route, to me, this was the most boring portion, was basically from kind of like the Trace up to Tupelo, essentially, because the road's just lined by big pine trees, which in a sense can be pretty. But I grew up in an area of Texas where I grew up around landscapes like this, especially up near the Sam Houston National Forest. So I don't particularly find pine tree roads, essentially. I don't know how to describe that well, but that's just not my favorite scenery. So I got a little sleepy in this section. I'll just say that. But Jackson can be a cool city to visit. I'll be honest, when I did this trip, I did not spend a lot of time in Jackson. I know that there's some old restaurants there that people say you should go to, and there is some good history in Jackson, but I decided that I wanted my history stop as far as big cities went to be Tupelo, which is another couple hours up the Trace. So I think I got lunch in Jackson at a barbecue restaurant, and I'm just going to leave it nameless in this episode because I didn't have the best experience. I messed up and I just ordered brisket. And if you know anything about me, I'm a huge barbecue snob. And I forgot to ask for the brisket moist. So when I got my food, it tasted like I was eating cardboard because the brisket was lean and it was so dry. And I was trying to not say anything negative in my YouTube video about it because I don't like talking. And that was my fault. That was my fault for ordering brisket incorrectly. But it was just one of those where I was like, oh no, like, I don't know what I was supposed to do. I do remember the banana pudding at this spot being really good. But
wait, so I have to bring this up in every episode. I don't eat meat, so I don't know. I've never had brisket. You have to order it moist or it comes out, it's served dry. Is that how it works?
Not if it's cooked perfectly. So Texas style brisket, and of course there's different styles of barbecue cooking, but like as being from Texas, I'm a Texas brisket snob and I prefer it cooked a certain way. But there's two main cuts of brisket. There's lean and then there's moist, and it comes from different parts of the piece of meat itself. Oh. The moist pieces have more fat on them. The lean pieces have less, and thus, because there's just less fat, it usually ends up being a drier cut of meat. If you are like a brisket cooking scientist, you can get moist. You can get juicy, lean brisket that doesn't taste like cardboard, but you can definitely overcook it. Everyone's taste buds are different. Some people like that. I personally prefer moist brisket because I also think there's more flavor in it because of the fat content. So everyone's different. I will say when I was younger, I preferred to eat lean brisket because I also was like, I'm being healthier. And now I'm like, nah, dude, clog my arteries, give me the flavor. I only order moist. So
I was just picturing like someone in the kitchen, like with a brush, like brushing the meat to make it moist, and that's absolutely not how it works. Okay, I understand.
Yeah. A lot of times if you go to a barbecue restaurant and order like a brisket sandwich or something, it's usually like chopped up lean brisket with like barbecue sauce added. And truthfully, like a lot of times in my like we can have a whole barbecue podcast if you want. Barbecue sauce does not belong on barbecue. And that's the Texan in me. People from Tennessee and the Carolinas and other places will absolutely disagree. Kansas City, they do things very different up there too. But if you got to put, it's like putting A1 sauce on a steak. If you got to put any barbecue sauce on your meats, you messed up. So for me, like I don't ever get like chopped pork sandwiches, chopped brisket. And in this exact scenario, the brisket was dry enough because I messed up when I ordered it that I was like, dude, it needs barbecue sauce to be eaten because it's just too dry. So
this is a foreign world for me. I probably won't join you on your barbecue podcast, but I'm learning a lot here today.
maybe one day I'll try and find there is a spot here in Denver. I won't keep this side quest of barbecue going too long, but there is a spot here that does like jackfruit, and they do some other like vegan options on their barbecue. And when I do go there, I think of you because I'm like, oh, Sanna could eat this.
I would love to try it.
Yeah. So between Jackson and Tupelo, there are a couple of things that I think are worth stopping to see. Again, Jackson might be worth visiting. I definitely wouldn't stay there for the night because I just don't think that you're far enough up the trace at that point. If you want to go super slow and spend 4 or 5 days, then yeah, maybe stay in Jackson. But I think it's worth trying to push to Tupelo for the evening. But right outside of Jackson, there are the cypress swamps. And if you're someone who just enjoys this type of landscape and feeling like you're down in the southern swamps of Louisiana, I would totally check this one out. I will warn you that there's definitely going to be mosquitoes and they will eat you alive. Speaking from experience, but there's a cool boardwalk that goes through there, and I spent probably 5-10 minutes checking it out. You might need a little more time if you do the whole boardwalk, but it's worth it to walk down there, snap a couple pictures, maybe drink some water off your bike and then get back on the road. Oh, that's another thing I'll mention. Since we are on the topic of, things to know before you go, I guess, going back to that part earlier, I don't remember seeing a lot of bathroom break stops. So if you're someone that needs to use the restroom a lot of these little like pull offs on the side of the road, from my memory, a lot of them don't have like restrooms available. So also just keep that in mind. I think a few of them do, but that's definitely not something I remember seeing. So
that's interesting when it's National Park Service managed. Usually there are like pit toilets at all the like pullouts.
Yeah.
Popular ones at least.
I think some of them have it, but definitely not a lot of them. And I know that in Natchez, as well as closer towards Nashville, there are visitor centers that have maps. And you can also get maps to the trace online if you just want to print, the digital version or save the PDF to your phone to reference. I did not. I just kind of sent it. I'm not someone who needs to use the restroom every hour and a half. I do have friends that are like that, though. So Davin is that person. So Davin, you got it a little easier than us, though. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But anyway.
I have a Shiwi.
A built-in an OEM Shiwi.
Factory.
From the factory. So yeah, if you're someone who doesn't use the restroom a lot, just keep that in mind. Maybe download one of those maps that has that key on there that tells you where those pit toilets are. But moving up the trace from there, again, I don't really go to biker bars in this part of my life, but I will tell you the one thing that I got guilt tripped on in this area for not stopping at was this little biker bar called Ratlifts right outside of Jackson. And it kind of sits down there kind of on a waterway. So it kind of feels like you're at like a swamp bar so to speak. And a lot of locals recommend it. That's apparently a good spot that a lot of them will go to on the weekends. And I believe they also have food. So if you want to, engulf yourself in local, motorcycle culture, that's definitely a stop that you want to add to your list. But moving up the road from there, actually, let's backtrack. Just drink responsibly if you do decide to partake in some Ratliff's debauchery there. But moving up the road a little bit, there is a quick pull-off stop, and it talks about like the Upper Choctaw boundary. And this is one where like I just pulled in, I read the sign and moved on. There's another spot just up the road from there called French Camp. And I did not stop at this, but I do remember people telling me that it is worth a stop. So if you're someone who maybe is more interested in kind of the part of the Trace's history where, people started coming in and setting up little towns essentially for different reasons. Something I didn't mention earlier is that as more people started using this as like a trading route to get down the Mississippi and start walking back north, and then when the U.S. started using it for postal mail and everything else, French Camp was one of the like posts along the route. And so there are some old buildings there that look like little log cabins essentially. And that is definitely a stop that people have recommended to stop at. I just didn't have time, essentially. I messed up, I goofed, and I just didn't put it into my plans that day. So I will say, I think the Trace is something that you can ride it more than once. And so part of me is kind of glad I missed some things, because at some point in the future, it's probably going to be another 10 years from now, but I can now go back to the Trace and see the things that I missed on the first trip. This is definitely something I wouldn't ride, every 5 years. I think there's other things I would like to go back and repeat, but there's definitely enough to go back and ride it again.
Do you feel like there's a different, like you'll have a different experience if you ride it in a different direction? I know we've talked about that on some like more scenic roads. You'll obviously see different viewpoints depending on what side of the road you're on, but do you feel like there's any value in like doing it from the other direction, or is it just going to be pretty much the same thing because it's all about where you stop?
That's a great question. I think so. I know we talked about this when we talked about Route 66, and it's like it's better to do Route 66 from Chicago to Santa Monica because it just gets more scenic as you go. And I feel like that kind of rings true with the Trace. And a lot of the scenic stops are just, it's like right off the road. So it doesn't matter. Like you're going to see the signs for them, no matter if you're going north to south or south to north. But if you're wanting the riding to get better as you go so that it feels like the trip is getting better, I do feel like you're probably going to enjoy it going south to north, personally. If I did it again, I think I would maybe, like if I did it, in the fall to experience the fall colors, maybe I'd start in Nashville and go south. But I don't know if I would do the whole thing in one go.
Yeah, makes sense.
So maybe I'd get to Tupelo and like turn around. Not sure. But again, we're still in Mississippi, and the Mississippi section, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. The Mississippi section of the Trace holds 310 of the 444 total miles of this scenic byway. So this is a huge chunk of this route. So there is a ton to see. And there's a lot of stuff, like I mentioned, that we're just kind of glancing over because there just isn't. You're not going to stop very long or probably even turn your bike off when you stop to check these things out. But if you do like Native American stuff, a couple more stops before you get to Tupelo would be the Chickasaw Council House as well as the village sites. And those are both things that you don't really need to get off your bike to see. You just kind of read an info board and just pretend that you can see the structures. But after that, you're in Tupelo, and I did decide to stay in Tupelo for the night when I did my trip because I wanted to go to the Elvis Presley birthplace site and museum the next day. I'm not a big Elvis fan, but I do just think that he holds such a powerful like place in music, and music is something I'm also very passionate about. So, king of rock and roll, right? So I felt like that was something I had to check out when I was there. And I actually really enjoyed Tupelo. I did not know how to say Tupelo before I got there. I kept calling it like Tupelo and something else. So I got corrected very quickly once I got there on how to say it, which was fine. But all kinds of hotels are there. I think I stayed at like a Best Western or something on like the north side of town, but it is a smaller city. So when I say north side of town, you're still only like 10 minutes from the Elvis Presley birthplace, essentially. And this area is kind of surrounded by flat farmland. So it's not super, super scenic, but it kind of reminded me of when I was in the Arkansas Delta and went to Johnny Cash's boyhood home. And the scenery is a little similar there. It's just super flat. And if you're an Elvis Presley fan, that's definitely something I think you should do there. There are some cool eateries, and I went to a good coffee shop in Tupelo, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but I can't. It was very hip. Everyone was wearing like punk rock t-shirts and serving up good coffee. So,
Nice.
But it was a cool little town. I would definitely go back there and, maybe if I could, maybe spend a little more time checking out some of the other food spots. But I thought it was cool.
This has been on my list for a while because I really do want to see the Elvis Presley birthplace museum. I had to cut that out, obviously, of my last trip because I didn't go that far, like northeast. And I also had the Johnny Cash boyhood home on my list, and I had to cut that out too because it's too cold to go that direction. Yeah, but one day.
If I had to pick one or the other, which they're not exactly close to each other, and I think there's some bias here, but I would probably pick the no, that's a lie. I would pick the Johnny Cash boyhood home. I think seeing the town of Dias, which is really close to, it's basically in the same area where he grew up. Just essentially like a mile from his house. They have a whole museum in Dias dedicated to him. That was really cool. I really, really liked it. The Elvis Presley birthplace spot is cool if you're an Elvis Presley fan. I will say I was by far the youngest person there. Everyone else was like 70 plus years old that was checking the place out. And I was just like, okay, there's definitely like a generational gap here. Like, I feel like Elvis Presley relates to just an older generation than ours. Not saying I don't know some Elvis Presley songs. He's just not my favorite musical artist, right?
Don't you feel like that's the vibe on this whole trip, the Natchez Trace Parkway? Like, how many young people did you see out exploring like the historic signs?
In the towns, I saw more younger people, but that's not the trace, right? I do feel like most of the people I came across at the scenic pullouts and stuff were like older people that were like maybe on retirement or like an extended vacation. Every now and then I saw a family, but I would definitely say this route definitely just relates to an older generation, unless you're in the history.
I think that's the case with a lot of these like classic American road trips, like even Route 66. When I did that over the course of a week, I ran into the same people like at all these different stops, like on multiple days. I would run into the same people, and they're all like boomers, basically in retirement. They're out exploring America and checking off all these sites from their bucket lists. And you just don't see a lot of people. I mean, I am turning 40 in a few months. I'm not that young, but I still count myself as a young person. And you just don't see a lot of like millennials or Gen Z necessarily doing a lot of the stuff. I think those, like our generations maybe go more to like the national parks and like do some of the outdoorsy stuff more than the historic stuff, which is good and bad, I guess. They'll get there in a few years.
I think so. I think our generation just likes to disassociate right now.
Yeah.
Rather than acknowledge history.
Yeah.
Which has its pros and cons. Like, I understand the want and need of looking at pretty rocks rather than, educating ourselves. I get it. But I'm a nerd, man. I love history. So
absolutely.
I think that's why this one just appeals to me so much. Mm-hmm. But if you are young and you are listening to this podcast, I do think it is worth it to go check this out. But I do think, speaking of history stuff, there is one other spot that a lot of people in Tupelo like to check out, and that is the Tupelo National Battlefield. I did not stop at this. It was one of those where I had to kind of pick and choose because I knew I had to get to Nashville for the night. And I did go to the Elvis Presley birthplace and museum right when it opened. And I was one of the first people there. And by the time I was done checking out the museum on site, as well as going through like the boyhood home and just walking in the grounds, there was a lot of people in the parking lot. So I will also recommend that. If you can go to that right when it opens to avoid most of the crowds. I think that's the best way to do it. But yeah, I basically just had to pick and choose. I couldn't do both with the time I had. So if you're more into war history, that the Tupelo National Battlefield will probably be more up your alley. But that'll be saved for next time. And I did look up the coffee shop, and it's called Lost and Found Coffee for anyone who's a coffee nerd like myself. But there is a state park as you get back on the trace called, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Tishomungo State Park. And it looks, from the photos I've seen of it, it looks like a really beautiful place to go hiking, especially in the fall, like lots of rocks, lots of fall foliage, and maybe a good spot to go camping if you're someone who wants to camp along the trace. That is something I think I forgot to mention earlier. There are 3 campgrounds along the entire Natchez Trace Parkway that are part of the parkway itself. And they are all free, and they are all first come, first serve. So depending on when you go, you might be battling people in RVs that are just kind of, living the retiree life, and they're just living on the parkway for 2 weeks at a time. So I personally wouldn't. So I'm different from Sanna. I do not like to just wing it with my lodging. I like to know that I have a place to sleep every night, especially when I'm camping. And so Sanna, we've talked about this in another podcast, but Sanna likes to just kind of wing it and book her lodging as she goes. And I am the type of person where lodging is the one thing I like to have figured out before I start the trip, because I just don't want to pay too much for a hotel. Or if I'm tent camping, I don't like getting somewhere and, the sun's going down in 2 hours and now I don't have a place to put my tent up. So I prefer to have everything booked ahead of time. So it's really hard for me to go to first come, first serve campgrounds because I'm scared there's not going to be anything left for me. But I have seen some motorcyclists have luck, but that's not my favorite gamble. So
yeah, if you're going to camp, definitely make a reservation, because that can get real sketchy. But as we know, our friend doesn't love camping. So
if I camped, I probably would book things ahead of time and really plan out my days around where I'm staying for the night. But since I don't, since I'm a motel princess, I just like to not have to limit myself in how far I can ride in a day. I just want to go as far as I want to and then pick a place to stay. But if I was camping, I would definitely plan ahead a little better.
Yeah. So I will say that is the one thing. If you're someone who does want to camp along this route, I would say check out Tishomungo. It looks really pretty, and I believe there is a decent sized campground there. And just know that, and those I believe you can reserve in the state parks. But if you're trying to camp along the trace itself, just know that it's first come, first serve, and good luck. But after that, you start getting into Alabama. And Alabama only holds 34 of the 444 miles of the Natchez Trace Parkway. And I'll be honest, there isn't a lot to see in those 34 miles. There are a couple of Indian mounds. There's a couple little natural springs that are just off the side of the road that have some pull-offs. But I will say there are a couple things that are more of side quests in Alabama that a lot of people will probably recommend you do if you're going to make an adventure out of the trace. And one of those is going to be Muscle Shoals and Florence, Alabama. This area is just known as the Shoals. And if you are a music buff, then you have probably heard of this area. Leonard Skinner has recorded there. Lots of people, especially in the 60s and 70s, recorded records out in this area. So that might be something that's worth your while if you want to go check that area out and see some of that stuff. Another
I've been
area,
through there. Super cool.
Oh, you have?
Highly recommended.
Cool.
Yes.
When did you go?
We were driving through randomly at
okay.
one point, but we had to go to the Shoals because I enjoy music.
Sick. Yeah, I've heard it's super cool. I had a friend go through there 2 months ago, and they sent me photos. They were like, "Look," and they were standing in front of the recording studios and stuff.
That's
and I was,
so cool. Yeah. We were actually, we were on our way from Detroit to Austin for South by Southwest, in 2003.
Okay,
So,
back in the day when South by Southwest was still good.
Exactly. No, it was rad. And we were on tour and had to cruise through there because I was with a bunch of music nerds.
Sick.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I would love to go. I think going back to your question, Sanna, like if I did the Trace again, this is definitely something I would go check out, and I would want to go towards the fall just so that the weather was a little more enjoyable, probably late October, so it's a little less humid too, because this area is right on the river, and so it's definitely going to be humid. But it looks beautiful from the photos I've seen and dropping, the Google Man down on the Google Maps. It looks like a pretty neat little area of Alabama.
There's a really good documentary on the whole Muscle Shoals thing too on one of the YouTubes or whatever. So that's tickles your fancy. Check that out too.
Sweet.
And I think, again, as someone who's not like a classic history buff, like I don't really care that much about war history. Music history, I think, is like a different genre, and there's so much of that in the South. Like if you just want to do a little detour off the Natchez Trace, you can also go do the Blues Highway that kind of runs from Memphis to New Orleans. It also goes through Mississippi, but more like along the Mississippi River. And there's so much just blues music, like in general history in the South. That's pretty cool, and that's nearby to this area too.
Yeah, I agree. There's lots of cool music stuff. And before we get to the Music City, we're almost there. We're almost to Tennessee. But there is one other thing, another side quest that I would recommend that you stop and see, and it's called the Rattlesnake Saloon. This is kind of a biker destination out in this little pocket of Alabama. And it is basically like a little restaurant that's kind of built into like a cave. And you're not underground. It's kind of just, I don't know how to explain it, but they have live music, they have food, and people always ride out there, from what I've been told, to just have this unique, weekend experience, basically. I have heard it can get really busy on the weekends. So if you are someone who's going to ride this like on a Saturday or Sunday, maybe just be prepared for a crowd. But that is another really popular spot that people like to go to. But one of the last things, in a spot that I really liked stopping at was the Colbert Ferry Park and River Overlook. And it's right before you go over this bridge that goes over the river. And it might be Colbert Ferry. I'm not entirely sure, but we're going to say Colbert, like Steve Colbert. And, but I really liked it. I like water features. I think they're fun. And so if you're someone maybe like Sanna who likes to pack a sandwich and have lunch somewhere, this is a spot that I would highly recommend checking out because it's super, super pretty. And back in the day, when the Trace was just, a foot trail or used for the post and everything, this was a ferry spot where they would ferry you basically across the river. So pretty neat.
Cool.
There is no ferry these days, but they're just a big old bridge, nice and modernized. But after that, you are in Tennessee, and this part of the Trace is 101 miles. And I will definitely say that I think this is the most scenic and curvy stretch of the parkway. With that being said, because it is so fun on a motorcycle, I will say to watch your speed, though, because there are a lot of cops. And I saw more police officers in this section than I did on the entire thing. So
party poopers,
absolutely. And I will say, as you get closer to Nashville and Leaper's Fork and that whole area, as you just get back to civilization, essentially, when there's just more people around, you will start to see more cops checking people's speeds. So just be mindful of that. But from a riding perspective, this is super enjoyable, and it's really twisty for this area. not like hairpin twisty, but you're going over like gentle hills and curves, and there's like, limestone rocks and all this stuff. So it starts to kind of turn into like the Appalachian foothills, essentially. Very mild. But the Tennessee section has a couple cool sites that I think are worth checking out. There's two sections that are called the Old Trace Drives. And both of these are basically like little 2-track gravel roads that you can still drive or ride down. And this is basically the original Trace before they built the paved route nearby. So there are some old sections, whether it was like the foot trail or it was when they widened it for horse and buggy. Some of that still exists, and you can still check that out. I did ride my Lowrider ST down these, and it was perfectly fine. There's one section where if it had just been raining, I don't think I'd want to go down it. It might be a little sketch. I remember there being like a mud puddle, but overall you should be fine. If you're comfortable riding on gravel, this is nothing. But moving further north, one thing that I think is really interesting is that Meriwether Lewis is buried right off of the trace. And so there's also a monument there. He died basically right off the Natchez Trace. And there's like a log cabin there that kind of tells the story of what happened. And Meriwether Lewis is like Lewis and Clark for those that aren't quite following. So
I was going to ask who this character was.
Who's old Meriwether?
Yeah, I didn't know his name was Meriwether.
Yeah.
What a jolly old chap.
Yeah. So old Meriwether died basically right off the trace. And I unfortunately don't remember the whole story off the top of my head, but yeah. You think about all the things Lewis and Clark did, because there is the Lewis and Clark Trail that goes across the United States. And, I think that it's just so fascinating that that's where he died. I mean, that dude got around for his time period. He saw a lot of the United States. And so the fact that he's buried there is very interesting.
That was his whole thing, just getting around.
Just getting around. Definitely. And there is a big campground. So that is the final campground on the trace that you can stay at. Looks really pretty, but when I rode through it just to check it out, there were tons of RVs, and I would definitely be concerned about, if I got there in the late afternoon, if there'd even be anything available, even on a weekday. So just something to keep in mind. But as you keep going north, if you like waterfalls, Jackson Falls is worth getting off the bike to stop and see. It's one of the bigger ones. You'd have to do a little hiking trail. I did not have time to do this, but I've heard it's beautiful. And as you keep going north, Leaper's Fork is going to be the next stop. And a lot of people like to get off the trace and go to Leaper's Fork. In Nashville, this is one of those kind of motorcycle destinations. People will do a loop and do part of the trace to Leaper's Fork, have lunch, and then, blast back to Nashville however they want. It's not too far. I want to say you're like 30, maybe 45 minutes from Nashville from here. But it's just a cute little town. It's known for music, and there's a couple eateries and bars there. Davin, have you ever been there?
Yeah, I've been out there. It was a while ago. I don't know which month or whatever, but it was a cool little rip from Nashville.
Yeah, anytime I ask people from Nashville, like, oh, where should I go ride? And they're always like, oh, go to Leaper's Fork. So it's definitely one of those spots. If you talk to a local, they're probably going to tell you to go out there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it was. It was like my buddy and I were going through, and we met our buddy who's a drummer in Nashville, and we went out to Leaper's Fork and, did the thing. It was cool.
Yeah. I rode through, but I have not gotten to actually stop and do the locals ride to Leaper's Fork. I still haven't truly gotten to experience it. There's a gas station there. That's one of the reasons I stopped, because I wasn't sure if I was going to make it all the way to the end. Because from here, you're not far from the end of the trace. I think you're only 20 miles there's a Shell gas station right at the end of the trace. I just wasn't sure if I was going to make it. And I, for one, do not like pushing loaded bikes around when I'm out of gas. So 700 pounds pushing it up and down hills just isn't happening. So I'd rather just stop for gas early. But yeah, after Leaper's Fork, if you hop back on the trace, you're going to go over the Double Arch Bridge, or Birdsong Hollow is what this is known as. It's a very iconic bridge in this area, especially in Nashville. Unfortunately, it has become known for suicide attempts. And so they put giant fences along both sides of the bridge in recent years to try and deter people from doing such things, which that is a good thing. I do understand why they did it. But it completely changes the vibe as you ride across it. I got to ride across it before they put the fencing up. And then when I rode across it on my trip a couple years ago, when I did the whole trace, I was like, what is this? Because it makes the bridge feel so different. So pros and cons, but that is something a lot of people will stop to see. But if you're just someone who likes to rip across a bridge, then rip it up. And from there, you're basically at the end of the trace. You're just a few miles from the very end. And I truly feel like at this point, you save the best for last. And at this point, if you do not have celiacs, you deserve the world's best dang biscuits from the Loveless Cafe. And this is a place that I would probably wait in line for to eat at, just for the biscuits alone. They're so good. And this was actually my first time eating at the Loveless Cafe. And I went for dinner, essentially, since I ended my evening in Nashville there. And they're known for just like Southern comfort food. And it's just been there forever. It's a very iconic spot in Nashville to eat at. And I can't remember what I ordered. It was probably like chicken fried chicken or something, which, oh man, what a debate. You want to talk about Southern food? Chicken fried chicken versus chicken fried steak? I'm a chicken fried chicken girly all day. Chicken fried steak's gross.
How dare you?
How dare I? But Loveless Cafe has all kinds of different southern snacks. I know I had fried green tomatoes there too. Of course, had to start and end the whole trip with some FGTs, but that place is delicious. And I remember taking a thing of biscuits to my buddy's house, whose couch I crashed on, because he was like, that's all I want. He was like, just bring me some biscuits and you could crash on the couch. So yeah, it's one of those things. If you can eat it, definitely enjoy it.
I want the biscuits.
You do want the biscuits, dude. They're
Give
so
me the
good.
biscuits.
Cheddar Bay biscuits at Red Lobster could never. Like, those are some good like restaurant biscuits, but Loveless Cafe, like, they are so good. So good. Like, it's touristy, but I would go back there on my next trip to Nashville, which is basically kind of the next and final thing. And we could have a whole podcast on Nashville, honestly, but the world is your oyster. It's, if you're someone who's into music history, there's a ton of it there. It is the Music City. Pretty much any kind of food you want to find in Nashville is there. I don't even want to get into things to do in Nashville because we'll be here for 17 hours. But yeah, that is what would your top picks be if you had to give someone a recommendation from Nashville? Have either of you spent time there?
I have. Yeah. I mean, I just go to the main drag and rip around it. Go to where I went to the bar where Brooks met Dunn. So if it wasn't for that bar, we wouldn't have Brooks and Dunn and a neon moon.
In a neon moon, yes.
But I mean, it's just fun to like kind of rip. I don't know what street it's called. Is it 4th Street or Main Street or whatever it is? And
yeah,
just you can go into those boot stores and just look at boots for an hour. Look at hats. It's just cool to check out. And there's all like Garth Brooks owns this bar and so owns this bar, and it's just kind of neat to run around and check that stuff out.
Yeah, there's little pockets of Nashville. Like, there's an area called the Nations, and they've got some foodie stuff over there. There's some stuff closer to town. I think there's like an automobile alley that's got some like trinkety little stores, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Nashville, there's a lot to do in Nashville.
Last time I went through there, I stopped in, I don't know if you guys know our friend Sarah Winslow, the Leather Tramp, but she had a little spot there in the whatever building, and that she just moved out of. But it was a cool spot. That little neighborhood is neat. You can walk across the freeway or under the freeway to get food, and it's just a neat little setup.
Man, she rides more than almost anyone.
Yeah. And she did a lot of it on a Sportster. This girl we're talking about, if you don't know her Instagram is The Leather Tramp. And she put 100,000 miles on like a 2003 Sportster, which is so badass.
She's the best.
And then she upgraded. She just got a soft-tailed semi recently, and she just loves to ride. And she just, like, I've actually seen her, like, we've passed each other out on the road like twice, 2 or 3 times, I think, over the years, because she's just always out there. It's so cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. My only thing in Nashville, I've only been there once. I went out to see my favorite band, Against Me, played there a few years ago, and I went to visit my buddy who owns a tattoo shop there called Rebel Yell. My buddy Jay, he makes these tattoos, or he did, at least. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I have a tattoo on my leg that says Honky Tonk in Nashville, Tennessee. And he had a mission of doing that same tattoo on as many people as possible, so that, like, his dream was that people would just run into each other across the world somewhere and be like,
awesome.
"Oh, did you get that tattoo from Jay?" So I have a Nashville tattoo, but I haven't spent that much time there. I've only been there for a few days once a few years ago.
Cute.
Cool. Yeah, I've been in Nashville like a couple times, and it's been very quick stops. I've never spent. There was one time it was in 2020 at that, so that wasn't really the best time to try and go outside and experience Nashville because we all know what happened in 2020. But other than that, it's been like quick stops in, quick stops out. I've never gotten to spend, like 2-3 days exploring the city. So yeah, pretty much from there, that is the Natchez Trace Parkway. And I think that, again, if you're someone who really enjoys history, I think that this All-American Road is totally worth visiting. However, I think that if you're someone who just has to have like the most epic scenery and super twisty stuff, and you've got to go, 30 miles over the speed limit at all times, this road probably isn't for you. And that's completely okay. But if you're someone who just enjoys a nice cruise, and also if you take this trip at the right time of year so that it's not super humid and miserable, I think that you can have a really good time on this road. But I think you do have to go into it with the right attitude. Otherwise, you might just be like, oh, that was boring and not worth it. But I definitely enjoyed it. I remember getting to the end and just having this huge smile on my face and just being so stoked that I finally did the entire thing. So for me, it was worth it. But
hell yeah, brother.
Yeah, y'all have to make that decision for yourselves.
Yep, I'll do it.
I want to do it too. It looks cool.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. But I think that's going to be it for today. If you enjoyed this episode, we would really love it if you could rate and review it and subscribe to the show. Also follow at The Scenic Ride on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. And check out thescenicride.com for previous episodes, merch, and to sign up for our newsletter. Next time, Davin will be taking it international and talking about New Zealand's South Island, which I am personally excited for because I've never traveled there. So I'm excited to hear all about this Lord of the Rings lore. But until then,
enjoy the ride.
Whoa, that was new.
All right. Sick.
Okay, good work, you guys.
Nailed it.
Hell yeah, brothers.
The Scenic Ride is hosted by Staci Wilt, Davin Ortonen, and me, Sanna Bowman. Our theme music is by Ryan Sin. If you like the show, please rate and review it and tell your friends to listen. For all the latest updates, follow at The Scenic Ride on Instagram or visit thescenicride.com. Thanks for listening.